Jewish Insights with Justin Pines on JBS is made possible in part by the clubs at Pearl River, New York, luxury rental communities for ages 55 and better, now leasing Phase 3 at the Reserve, and the B.L. Manger Foundation.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבשחים גם יוחד הנה מה טוב ומה נעים שבשחים גם יוחד.
Shalom and welcome to a special edition of Jewish Insights. My guest today is Dr. Elana Stein Hain, the Rosh Beit Midrash and a senior research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. As you may remember, the last time we spoke was on Purim earlier this year, and we explored the idea of her being an American Jew living in Israel for the year, exploring the idea of what it means to be a diaspora Jew in the land of Israel. And we've come a long way since then. We'll discuss further. She's the host of Texting, a podcast that considers the big issues of the day through a Jewish lens, and Season 2 will be launching in the coming weeks. I cannot wait to listen and to learn from you, Elana. And she is the author of Circumventing the Law, Rabbinic Perspectives on Legal Loopholes and Integrity, which uses loopholes as a lens for understanding rabbinic views on law and ethics. As I mentioned, she's living in Israel for the year, along with her husband, Rabbi Yonah Hain, and their lovely two sons, and she's researching religious Zionism while she's there. Elana, thank you so much. So thrilled to have you here. I know things are crazy in Israel right now, and we just felt like an opportunity for us to connect. I want it for myself, and I also want it for our audience.
Oh my gosh, I've got to tell you, Israel, we feel like we're under quarantine. You know, the flight's in, the flight's out. It is great to connect with you.
The feeling is mutual, and it feels like, you know, it's very easy to be sitting over here and you're kind of, obviously I'm WhatsApping friends. How are you doing? How's your family? Did you sleep last night? All that kind of thing. My wife's parents are there. I don't think they've slept since they got there. It's been totally crazy. And obviously reading the news is like very hard to make sense of, you know, there's big, broad strokes, but it's hard to make sense of what's really happening. So I'm really excited to not only connect with you as a friend, but also to hear your Torah and wisdom in this moment. So first of all, you're a family divided right now, correct?
Yes, we have.
I don't mean politically, I mean geographically.
No,
yeah.
Half of us are stuck in America because my younger son and my husband went for a family wedding, and the other half are here in Israel. So that's definitely been interesting. Let's just say I have never had to make a decision as a solo parent about how to deal with an emergency situation like this. But I am far from the only solo parent doing this in this country. So it's definitely humbling to see how many other people, not just because family members may be stuck outside of Israel at this moment, but because family members may be in the army and not home for lots of the time. So you live and you learn and you try to follow other people's example.
Wow. I cannot imagine that. That's a lot. And it's like, it feels like you said, it's just like one of many things happening for a lot of people. But obviously in your family, that's a real thing. Your husband and your son are in America. And
I have friends whose parents are in the hospital currently, Shaarei Tzedek, in Jerusalem, and had been before the war started and are now after the war has begun, even in the intensive care unit. And just the ability for them to go and visit and see and check on what's going on with their family members. I mean, I have people who are making weddings for their children this week, right? There's a very COVID mindset, but with a different kind of direct immediacy to the fear. And, you know, they're making it in their backyard with 30 people max, because that's all they can do. So it's a lot of people sitting Shiva. This past week, my friend's father was sitting Shiva, and she had to figure out how to get him from this town to that town. And she couldn't really be at the Shiva because she had to be home with her kids who aren't in school. So there's so many different pieces to this experience. I mean, it's wild.
Wow. Okay.
And I'm speaking as a Jerusalemite. I'm not speaking as somebody who's living in Haifa, who's living in Tel Aviv, or who's living in Tamra, who actually saw direct hits, experienced direct hits, right? We call them sirens in Jerusalem. They call them missiles because they actually experience them in a very different way.
What has been the emotional roller coaster of this? What have been the feelings that you've been going through?
So I think I mirror certain aspects of what I'm seeing around me. And it goes something like, first there's an intense fear, right? That Friday morning, late Thursday night, we got this searing, blaring alarm that even Israelis didn't know what that sound was. And that was basically an alarm to say, wake up, we're at war with Iran. We don't know what's going to happen next, but we know the entire country has to be awake. So there's this incredible fear that sets in. Then there's sort of this mix of like anxiety and depression and boredom, right? Because you're waiting and you're sitting and you're waiting and you're worried about, oh my gosh, Soroka Hospital, how could it be? Oh my gosh, the Weizmann Institute, how could it be? And mixed within all of this is a sense of deep, deep pride and hope that after 2 years, actually something might have been done here that can make a better future for the Middle East, a possibility of Israel being able to exist in this region. And there are people who are experiencing this as nothing short of miraculous, especially when the US came in with their B-2s. The feeling is a sense of, holy cow, this is transformative in a way that the last 2 years of war, you don't see that same sense. And that has been incredible for me to witness and experience, the sense we're living through something historic. We're living through something game-changing. We're living through something miraculous. Doesn't mean that it isn't without its questions. Doesn't mean that it isn't without its worry. It doesn't mean it isn't without its depression. It doesn't mean it isn't without Israel feeling like we're the world's pariah. But there is some sense of, there might be a future here, which I have not seen while I was here for the last year.
Say more. Why?
The attack against Iran feels here like Iran was an existential threat backing so many of the terror actors in the region, Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis, that you're sort of striking at the source. And there's always been this looming sense of, well, if Iran has nuclear weapons, it doesn't matter if you get rid of Hamas in Gaza. You still have the scariest actor who's here, the most existentially dangerous actor who's here. And this is a state actor, not a guerrilla, a state actor. And so people are sort of like, they also feel a sense of, whoa, America's standing with us. And that's a great feeling for them too.
I know that like one of the things that there's like a lot of people that obviously have very strong feelings either way about both Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu.
Yes.
How has that played out during this time?
Oh, people, welcome to the land of cognitive dissonance, right? There are so many people who either are ready for the Gaza war to end and think it should have ended weeks ago, if not more. People who are hoping for this Israeli government to fall. People who are totally against Trump's policies in the United States, and I count myself among them, and yet see the necessity of striking Iran, see the necessity of people taking decisive action in doing that, and being able to say, wow, Netanyahu, you did it, kol hakavod, thank you. Right? Trump, you did it, kol hakavod, thank you. It then raises all these issues of, well, do I trust these people to continue this? Is it going to end quickly? Is this going to become another war of attrition, the same way Gaza has? Okay, but I would say cognitive dissonance is the order of the day for so many people. And guess what? I think that's what being an adult is. It's okay for people who you think are problematic to do things that are also good, and vice versa. And I'm not saying that, I mean that as a lesson to myself as well. And that's been very powerful.
Does it feel like in Israel there's a lot of unity right now?
Yes, and people are worried about the Chatufim also. And what happened there. And people who are concerned that the Gaza war has gone on too long and that it's time to close up shop and figure out some diplomatic solution. They're worried that the Iran situation just kind of masks that whole conversation. So that's very, very real. And there are also people who are very concerned about areas that don't have enough bomb shelters, right? And there are Bedouin areas that don't have enough bomb shelters, just general Palestinian Israeli areas that don't have enough bomb shelters. By the way, I'm living in Jerusalem. There are Jewish areas that don't have enough bomb shelters. So there's a lot, but in terms of a sense of, at least among Jewish Israel, that, whoa, like we can breathe, like our grandchildren, God willing, can live here. We destroyed a countdown clock in Iran that was a countdown clock to Israel's destruction, literally in a public area in Iran. That, it feels transformative in a different kind of way. Yeah, thank God, really.
So many questions. So first of all, the last time we sat together on JBS on this show was Purim, right? And there were all the feelings back then, if you can even put yourself back in that mindset of, looking at what was happening in Israel at the time, right? In I guess the early spring of Israel. And, another word that's been thrown around a lot now is there's a lot of Purim, there's a lot of Achashverosh talk, there's a lot of, comparing to what happened in Purim as a Jewish lens to look at this. Is that striking a chord for you, or do you connecting to that? Do you feel like that's there for you? Talk to me.
Here's what I have to say. I think the connection for me is, yes, of course, Iran, Persia, got it. I think the connection for me is, there's one very clear connection, which is sometimes you have to make alliances that are uncomfortable in the moment, but they serve the greater good, right? So that's some of the cognitive dissonance that I was talking about before. I think Megillat Esther, the story of Esther, is very much that, right? Meaning making alliances with Achashverosh, Esther essentially giving up her life to a certain extent, that now she's going to forever live with this king who she didn't choose, right? That's a big one. Where I think there's another really important parallel is how you choose to interpret the story, right? So famously, God's name is not in the story of the book of Esther. And where is God's name here? So there are people like myself who, because I'm a religious person, because I'm a person of faith, I see God's hand here. And I interpret God's hand here. But no one's going to give me some sort of revelation that God's hand is here, right? But here's where I think there are two major differences. Number one, we didn't have an army in Esther. What we did is, at the end, we just flailed our arms, killed as many people as we could to defend ourselves. But there was no sense of, you have a professionalized army, you have hard power, you have the soft power of diplomacy, you have a responsibility to figure out how you use that power, right? And how you do it. So different, a sense of independence and autonomy and a need to think with our values about where we want to go from here, rather than just flailing our arms to try to save ourselves. I think that's a major difference. And I would say similarly, you don't see the personal losses that people have. I know that Esther, she doesn't have a life after this, essentially. But you don't actually see the destroyed homes in Tel Aviv. And you don't actually see, Iranian Jews even fleeing Tehran, right? Like you don't see the actual human toll that all of this costs. And it's really important to see, even at the end of the Megillah, we flail and kill whoever's trying to kill us. It's a very high number, right? There's no pathos there, right? So there's a whole different sense of, yes, if you give something a very reductionist spin of like, here's the big story, you miss out on all the little ways that different people, both on our side and on other sides, are experiencing these things. And I think it's vital just for humanization, really. I really do.
Beautiful. So talk to me about that language of Mesirat Nefesh, this idea of sacrifice. you can't say to someone else, well, this is the sacrifice, we lost that hospital. That's the sacrifice that needed to be made in order to get here. That feels like ugh and icky and those kind of things.
So what I actually see is the sacrifice that people are making is the decision by that administrator in Soroka the day before to empty the whole old ward. And that everybody in the midst of crazy had to go and do that and take care of that, even though it was probably exhausting, even though they probably wanted to go home for the day and didn't want to be out. And they did it. And the fruit that bore is that literally hundreds of lives were saved the next day. I would say a similar thing. I see people who, when it's time for a siren, they give us a 10-minute warning before, which is absolutely incredible. So when you get the 10-minute warning, there are some people who they're elderly and it's hard for them to walk down to the shelter. And so somebody will knock on their door and go walk them down to the shelter. And then afterwards, walk them back up to the shelter. There are kids here whose parents are not here. They are actually stuck abroad, and their family members or their neighbors are taking care of them, right? So to me, all of that is people are asking themselves, how can I do for others? Now, it's interesting, the kind of misirut nefesh, the kind of giving of yourself that you're describing is a kind of between yourself and God, right? Meaning the description that you gave of people praying longer, of people, right, was something where you're actually asking people to strengthen their connection to God, because it sounds like what this person was saying is that if you believe that God is at the helm of things, you really have to put in your supplication and recognize that this is a really urgent situation. And I think there are things like that going on in Israel as well, but I find that to be more on the joy side of things. I was reading after America's B-2s attacked overnight. So I found that out actually in the shelter the next morning, because people said, oh, America joined. We were woken up by the siren. We went into the shelter. People were like, did you guys hear? America joined. We're like, oh, that's why we have a siren right now. But the joy that people had that morning, some people prayed Hallel. Some people prayed the special prayer that you pray on a Jewish holiday, right? That's what people did. So that wasn't sacrificing. That was also trying to connect to God in those ways. But I think you have these different, I want to say, I'm thinking in Hebrew right now, you have these different maslulim, you have these different paths. And some people are pushing in the, how do I help my fellow person? Some people are pushing in the, how do I work hard on my relationship with God? And some people are pushing for, how do I show my gratitude, right? So to God, right? And to other people. And I would say I'm sort of like I'm a mishmash of all of them. Because it's really all of them are just saying, just recognize it's not business as usual. Just recognize that.
When you have moments of Hester Panim, you need to do like a look back at yourself and like, where did we go wrong? And you could argue, oh, the Jewish people were arguing. It was the summer of the Supreme Court fighting. Everyone was at each other's throats. It was so clear that we needed to do what's called a cheshbon hanefesh, like a review of our soul, and clarify what we were doing wrong. And the time of God's revelation is to not fall into complacency and say, the same way we approach like commandments as not to check a box and say, oh, well, I have this obligation to go help this woman upstairs, and I'm going to do that because I'm doing the right thing, but more to be like, God is validating what you are doing and is trying to encourage you to do more of it. And again, you could take it in multiple directions. Is that like on the political level? Is that on the person to person? Is that on the religious level? But the sense of like that God's having these powerful moments where it feels like God's light is shining upon the Jewish people after all that darkness is in some ways is almost like a boost from behind to be like, keep doing what you're doing, like keep helping each other, keep praying, like all those things. Yeah, so I would say two things. I think in a time like October 7th, humility is foisted upon you. And I think in a time like the war against Iran, the challenge for Jews when we feel like we're winning is to have humility.
and to be careful, and to not suggest that we are cavalier about the loss of human life, to not suggest that we think we have a free lottery ticket here and that we know we've already won, not to be, like you're saying, complacent, but I mean that not to allow hubris and the sort of the excitement of winning to allow us to think, oh, how great are we, right? We don't, in general, going back to the Bible itself, we don't say kochi v'otzim yadi. It's my strength and the strength of my hand that has done this. That is a very dangerous way for a human being to think. We can become arrogant and dangerous ourselves. And I also think, someone reminded me this week, and I thought this was very important, of Yehuda Amichai's line, and I don't remember the line off the top of my head, but it's something to the extent of, when the Jews were crossing the sea, all you could see was the sweat on the back of the person in front of you. Meaning, you don't see it as that big grand things. There are people who have died in the last week from missile hits. There are people who have lost their homes. There's decades of research that has been lost from the Shalom Institute. There are people who have died of heart attacks during sirens. There are children who are traumatized, absolutely traumatized. And there are people who are still licking their wounds of their children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews and siblings and spouses who were killed in the war in Gaza. So the ability to see a bigger picture without losing the experiences of those smaller pictures, I think is really, really key. Really key.
Beautiful. Okay, so I shared a couple Torahs that I'm thinking about right now coming in. I'm curious to hear from you. What are the Torah or Jewish texts that are really shaping the way you're thinking about? Bring, as you do on texting, bring your Jewish lens to the situation.
I think I'm also thinking like an American Jew. I am not blind to the fact that I ordered I don't know what I would say, like a remote voting possibility for the primary in New York so that I could rank Andrew Cuomo rather than Zoran Mamdani. And it didn't come, meaning he's not going to make it here. The mail is not exactly, we're not winning on that front, I would say. And I follow closely what happened in Boulder, and I follow closely what happened in DC, and I follow closely just the anti-Semitism that Jews are experiencing in America. And as a result of what's going on in Israel, the ratcheting up of this. And I think what I'm trying to think about now, I'm trying to think about hope, because it's been rekindled with this attack on Iran. And I truly hope that this is carried out in a smart way so that this doesn't become another war of attrition. And I truly hope that we're actually able to not, push the Chatufim conversation completely under the table and sidetrack it. And I'm thinking about the original Hatikva, the hope, because it is fascinating to me that Naftali Hertz Imber, who was living in what's now Ukraine, I think it was called Austria, Poland at the time, he wrote the original Hatikva, which was called Tikvatenu, our hope, before he ever stepped foot into Israel, 4 years before he ever stepped foot into Israel. And I'm just so taken by, first of all, just the references, the biblical references that are in the parts of Hatikva that he wrote that we still have now. It was originally 9 stanzas. We only have 2. And they also secularized those 2 a bit more than his were. And I'm also taken with the way he ends it. So I think that's what I want to share with you. And, we're on video. I don't know if it's useful for me to even share my screen. I don't know if I can even do that. But for people to actually see this, I think it's incredibly powerful. But a lot of people know that in the Hatikva, we say, Od lo avda tikvatenu, right? Our hope is still not lost, right? These were words that he wrote. But many of us don't realize that where those words come from is actually the book of Ezekiel, the book of Yechezkel, chapter 37, the famous story of Ezekiel in a valley with dry bones, and him essentially helping these bones come to life, to become human again. And the metaphor there is that the Jewish people, after their literal destruction of their first temple, were like dry bones. It was over. It felt like it was over. And in fact, what these dry bones basically say, and I'm going to read it to you, is they say, it goes like this: Vayomer Elai, God said to me, Ben Adam, human being, that's what God calls Yechezkel, Atzamot ha'ele, these bones, Kol Beit Yisrael Hema, they are all of the house of Israel. Hine Omrim, and what they're saying is, Yavshu Atzmotenu, our bones have become dry, Ve'avda Tikvatenu, and our hope is lost. Nigzarnu Lanu, we have already been doomed. It's a loss of hope. And what Naftali Hertz Imber did was he said, Od lo avda tikvatenu. No, our hope is not lost. Do not give up. And I have to say that from the minute I got here in August of 2024, I saw a real sense among Israeli Jews. Our bones are dry. We are lost. We are tired. We are wounded. We are angry. We are confused. And right now, we have a moment of, wait, no, od lo avda tikvatenu. We haven't lost that hope. And are we going to take advantage of that? Are we going to build on that? And the second thing I want to share from what he says, it's the last stanza of this 9-stanza tikvatenu, our hope. And he says like this, and I'm just going to read it in the English because I think it's hard to do so much Hebrew. Hear, O my brothers, in the lands of my exile, the voice of one of our visionaries, who declares that only with the very last Jew, only there is the end of our hope. And I find that remarkable because living when he did, on the one hand, he could imagine the very last Jew, but on the other hand, who could see the Holocaust coming in that kind of way? But the idea that what we need to do right now is to actually lean into our collectivism and to recognize that as long as there are Jews anywhere, they will fight for Jews everywhere. And as long as there is a Jew anywhere, the covenant between God and the Jewish people continues. To me, to hear someone write those words in 1878 and to be able to lean on those words now to experience a covenantal Judaism in a time that is very hard and very uncertain and very scary, that gives me hope.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I want to sit with both of those for a second. And first of all, I didn't realize that he just turned the language on his head and said, you know, Od lo avda tikvatenu, we have not lost hope. And I think what you're saying is also a super important point, just again on the first one, that a lot of Americans who didn't come to Israel didn't really experience that time, right? There was a lot of focus, you know, if you're reading on social media, there's a lot of like, get the hostages home, which we need obviously. And, you know, there was a lot of, you know, these heroic stories and the beepers and things that happened, but the sense of, and I would say even Americans who came to Israel sometimes feels like when they went to do barbecues, like on army sites, that like, there was almost an obligation of Israelis to perk up for Americans and be like, we want to make you feel great. I think actually when I had Danny Gordis on, that was one of the first people who was like, we do that for you a little bit, but a little bit when you're not there, Americans, there's a totally different emotion here. There's a like, I'm losing hope. I'm feeling like this is crazy. I don't know how much longer I can live in Israel. Like I can't, like maybe I don't want to raise my kids here. You've raised your kids here. We did this for multiple generations. Leave us alone. And that sense of that, you know, all is lost and hopelessness and just sheer exhaustion. And I hear you saying that like, almost like in the middle of the night, literally, right? I assume no one knew that was going to happen, that was on the, I think if Iran was surprised, then certainly the Israelis were surprised. I'm sure people said they knew. But
well, I'm sure Israel knew, but Israelis didn't
Israelis,
know.
Of course. But to wake up in the middle of the night and say there's a different reality here, which again, you pointed out, has all these losses, and it's not, there's a lot. This is not a simple
and we don't know how it's going to end. We don't know how it's going to end, but there's no question that there's like some wind in the sails. There's some wind in the sails.
I think anytime there's a war, there's this question of like, what's it going to look like afterwards? Like all of a sudden, like Iran the next day is going to be like, this like perfect because we killed this person and not that person. What does that look like? But I think you're saying one piece of it is like, can you imagine a world in which Israel feels safe, in which doesn't feel like there's an existential threat looming over Israel, it's hard to imagine, honestly, ever feeling that way, no matter what happens in the global world. But maybe you're right. Maybe there is. Maybe
this just feels different. It doesn't mean there aren't still threats, but it just feels different. That's just what I'm hearing. It's what I'm hearing from people. It's what I'm seeing on their faces. It's what I'm, even amidst so much loss, so much anxiety, so much depression, so much boredom, and so much uncertainty. But there's a wow, who thought this was even possible? Who thought this was even possible?
I saw someone post online, to be frank, just talking about how sad they were to be leaving Israel. It was an American who managed to get out, but was meant to come home a week and a half ago, and was like, it finally happened. And just, if you think about COVID and it being like, whatever you want to call it, let's call it unpleasant for lack of a better term, but much worse than that. And then you think about, like you said, October 7th and what it meant to be in Israel and like being, let's call it, stuck in Israel during that time. And then this different feeling, which is like there's still sirens, but not wanting to have to leave Israel is like a fascinating shift in disposition of like, let's say, the average tourist who's in town, let's say. It's different. It's really different. I think it's important for people to understand how different it is. Yeah.
Both people feel like they're living through something historic. They really do. And don't get me wrong, there are plenty of people. I could do my critique of people who are spending tens of thousands of dollars hiring private jets to get out of Israel at this time. And I kind of just want to say, why don't you give those tens of thousands of dollars to the Weizmann Institute or to Soroka? They could use it. So that I'm getting feeling a little bit of that, when people say, I'm feeling a little bit of that. But, like we say, my family's stuck in America and we're lucky to be here. Half my family's stuck in America and we're lucky to be here.
Let's start with that. How is that dynamic in your family right now? Like, you share as much as you want to share. I know that.
Well, here's what I'll say. Each parent is having incredible quality time with their child, with one of the children. It's just what that quality time entails is very, very different. So I'm with my older child, so I can say it's incredible when your child looks at you and says, I hope to tell my grandkids one day about what I lived through here. Wow. Right? Wow. And, okay, quick, we got to go down. We got to go down to the shelter. Quick, meaning it's, and again, I want to also emphasize, we're not in Haifa. We're not in Bat Yam. We're not in Tel Aviv. We're not in Tamra. We're not in places that have taken it on the chin in a much more destructive way, which totally colors our experiences differently. Totally. If you were talking with somebody from Tel Aviv right now, you might get a very, very different conversation. People who have lost their homes. Literally. People who have family members who were killed and got stuck under rubble. Right? That's not my experience of this right now. And I hope it doesn't become my experience of this. So it's just so different. But definitely historic times. And I really, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, Justin, is I just feel like it's so important for world Jewry to connect to each other during this time, because we have such losses this summer. There are so many North American Jews, and South American Jews for that matter, who usually come to Israel in the summer, and European Jews who usually come to Israel in the summer who are not getting to be here. And there are so many Israelis who usually work at camps, American Jewish camps and Canadian Jewish camps in the summer, and they're not able to get there. So, one question that I would leave you with is, how do we continue to have Jews have a real dialogue, right, about what each side is experiencing? Because American Jews are going through so much right now as well, in a different way, but absolutely going through so much. So how do we make sure that Israelis understand what's going on in North America too, right? And that's work we're all going to have to do. Anyone who cares about Jewish peoplehood is going to have to continue to work on.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I think, first of all, within your own organization, right, the Shalom Hartman Institute, where you work, I know that that's such a big feature, was like the summer. Like, there's a joke that there's a bump in the Jerusalem economy from the number of people who come for Hartman summer in Israel. And there's this whole, all the people that were coming, all the people who prepared classes, like there's this big Mecca moment in Israel. And that's just one example. And obviously there's many others out there. And I'll say, I remember back when I was working at the Hartman Institute, the summer of COVID, we had that challenge where it was, all these kids are supposed to go to summer camp and develop their Jewish identity. All these counselors are supposed to lead at summer camp and develop their Jewish identity, those kinds of questions. And we pivoted at that time, actually, I thought very thoughtfully, and put together really a digital camp for Jewish teens to learn that summer, which was fascinating. But it felt like this, how do we capture what's going to be lost, a generation, a summer of Jewish learning. And so I think there certainly is a challenge, and I see camps, calling for volunteers, and, we're supposed to run a camp all in Hebrew. Now we have no people who could speak Hebrew this summer. What's going to happen? My niece was supposed to go volunteer in Israel this summer. They just last night canceled the program. There's all these things are happening around us. I love your question, which is, step one is how do we just develop some empathy towards that and recognize there's all this, what's it called? When something explodes and there's second and third impacts of it, if that makes sense. There's a word for that.
I don't know. I would say secondary and tertiary impact.
Great. But there's a word in war for that. Let's call it ripple effects. That sounds more artistic.
Ripple effects, that works.
Ripple effects. There's all these ripple effects, as you pointed out, and you just talked about it even within Israel, which is someone now is helping the woman upstairs, this people, their family separated, those kind of things. And that there's ripple effects that really affect the Jewish community at large and beyond, obviously, oil futures, we won't discuss that, but things like that. And so being sensitive to that, and then also I think part two is what can we do about that? How might Jewish summer camp look differently this summer? How is Hartman going to navigate on having a program in Israel this summer? What is the economy like? All those questions.
Well, one of the things that I think is so significant about this moment of loss, of this connectivity between North American Jews and just diaspora Jews and Israeli Jews and Israel, is that the opportunity for people to actually share what they're experiencing, that's an in-person opportunity, right? There has been so much foment in the North American Jewish communities over what the Gaza war means and opinions about it. There has likewise been foment about it in Israel. How great would it be to be able to get people together to be able to share what it is? Israeli Jews are watching anti-Semitism in North America with shock and horror, to understand, well, what does it feel like on a daily basis? Because I just see the big things. I see the brick through the window. I see the big rallies. But how does it feel on a daily basis? Does it feel different going to the supermarket? Right? Those aspects. Or do you feel a sense of allyship with other Americans? And do they feel allied with you? Right? These are all questions where when you look from afar, it's like headlines. But when you actually talk to people up close, you get a very different conversation going, I think, which is very significant.
Play that out for me for a couple of minutes, because I know that's, what you're describing is beautiful, which is people actually like sitting and talking a little bit more, which I think is so important. But
We're going to need winter break. We're going to need winter break trips to Israel for American Jews. I'm serious. And we're going to need trips of Israeli Jews coming to America for different things. Meaning you can't substitute it for people to actually be there and see each other. And summer is like the convenient time for it to happen. But I really think that Jewish organizations have to figure out a way to like rebuild some of these deep relationships in person over the course of the year. And I think it's going to happen. I think people are going to do that. They're going to think about how to do that, and they're going to make it work. What I also think is important is I think we have a lot of alliance building to do, and it's very hard to do alliance building without people like being in each other's spaces, right? It's no surprise to anybody that liberal Zionism, that's sort of like that space between a right-wing Zionism and an anti-Zionism. Liberal Zionism needs visits to Israel. And Israelis need to know liberal Zionists in North America. And in order to strengthen those groups that connect, you actually have to be on site. So this isn't just a matter of how people feel. It's actually a matter of how do you continue to build bridges among the Jewish people when there's such a stark, like literal geographical divide that is hard or impossible to traverse right now.
Beautiful. All right, you raised two questions for me. One is, a very practical question. I'm just curious. I'm sure people are reaching out to you. I'm one of those people that have been reaching out to you.
Yes, thank you. It's been so helpful.
What are you hoping? What's your advice to people reaching out to friends and family in Israel in terms of, like the best advice to do that well right now? And what are you saying back to people that are reaching out to you? Yeah,
so I think the best is to just say, how are you doing? How are you doing? And what I basically say to people is we're in a strange holding pattern. Like you kind of figure out the dance steps. We're scared. And we also appreciate that we're living through historic times. So that's the way that I do it. But I do think that the question of how are you doing is a great one, because you don't know how people are going to answer. You really don't know how people are going to answer.
Oh, it's very funny you say that, because I wrote a text to someone, and I wrote this whole long, like, it wasn't a Shiva text, but it was almost a Shiva text, right? It was a little bit like, like, thinking of you, I'm so sorry, I hope you and yours are safe, just sending all the love, period.
Yes.
Which, first of all, was like a statement and closed also, by the way. Just like, I'm doing this thing, you don't have to respond. And then I literally hit send, and then I went into my WhatsApp and edited it, and I just wrote back, thinking of you, how are you? And I was
that's
like,
great.
That's
great.
And I was very proud that I did it. So I'm on the right path here. I'm working on it. The second thing
you're on the path that I think is the right path. But I think I saw somebody say, I feel like there's no good way to reach out to Israeli friends and family. And another person on that social media conversation who is Israeli said, no, the opposite. There's no bad way to reach out. We appreciate everything. And I see that also. I think people really appreciate no matter how people reach out, because it is scary, even if it's historic, it is scary.
Let me ask you two more while we're in that space. Another one is, you see a lot of Americans, and you're in this unique space that I want to tap into, which is that you're the American in Israel. So you see a lot of Americans, posting things like, next 2 weeks are the most crucial weeks, like very like, we're going to get them, this kind of like we need to win kind of thing. And like, do you feel like they have a legitimate voice to make those statements when they're not on the ground, right? I always felt like the people who are like opining about Israel from America, when it's not their kids who are fighting in the war, it's like have some. Look, so what do you think about that? Because you're there now. You're not commenting from the sidelines. Yeah.
Look, I think that if we want people to have a stake in Israel, they have to also be able to have an opinion. right? Meaning it can't just be, okay, we want you to support. They're allowed to have an opinion. What I just think is so important, though, is to actually be engaging with Israeli voices, right? I think the idea, and this is something that I've learned much more being here for the year. I learned so much by reaching out to Israeli friends, Anglo-Israeli too, reaching out to Israeli friends and saying to them, can you give me your take on this? Can I think with you on this, right? And that, to me, that's part of having a stake in a place. It's not that you agree with everything, but you are actually invested in how people who are there themselves are thinking about this. So I frequently will try to lift up Israeli voices that I agree with and share those rather than just going it on my own as this is what I think, because I'm also trying to support them and I'm also trying to appreciate what they say. But I do think whether I like it or not, whether it's comfortable or not, I do think that if we want Jews from around the world to feel that they have a stake in Israel and its future, I do think they have to be able to voice their opinions, even if those opinions aren't popular in Israel. But they have to know that they're not popular in Israel, right? There has to be some awareness of like, where do I fall on what's possible and what's realistic in Israel, you know?
Right. I think also there is a question of authority inherent in there, and like who has the authority to say that. Maybe it's more complicated now because America has entered the war. So there is some, I feel like the average American is not feeling that. People who have family overseas at military bases, of course, but someone like living in a random city in America might not feel the same sense of sacrifice or risk that an Israeli does, for example, by being in this war right now. Great. I want to ask you, you mentioned liberal Zionism. I know you've spent the year researching religious Zionism. Is there something that as you're doing this research on religious Zionism that bring that lens to what's going on right now? Are there things you've learned there that you want to apply to what you're thinking about here?
Oh my goodness. So I'm really researching religious perspectives on democracy and shared society. And to me, it's very important to actually find perspectives that are pro-democracy from a religious vantage point, not only from the left, but also from the right. Because I don't think that democracy should be something that is a left-wing issue. I think it should be shared across the board. It should be a liberal issue in the sense of classic liberalism, meaning not left-wing, just the liberal order where people have rights and people have freedoms. So it's been really interesting to do that research and to find, for me, I'm interested in the ideas because I think when you teach people a good idea, they build their world around that idea implicitly or explicitly. But it's been very jarring that, in the world of ideas, these can all coexist. But then when you have actual conversations with people from the religious Zionist community, whether from the left talking about the right or the right talking about the left, it is not pretty. It is not pretty. I literally was having a conversation with somebody from within the religious Zionist community. This is not somebody who's fringe by any stretch of the imagination, who essentially said religious Zionism is at war with secular Jewish Zionism in a manner of the kingdom of David being at war with the kingdom of Saul. And I didn't even say this to him because I was just so shocked to hear it. But afterwards, I'm saying to myself, those were bloody, bloody, bloody interactions. Why would you want to model the conversation on that, right? And then you have people who are on the left in religious Zionism who are looking at the Haredim and are looking at right-wing Zionists, right-wing religious Zionists who are making, compromises with the ultra-Orthodox not to go to the army. And the vitriol is real. It is not soft. It is not calm. It is visceral because people have lost their children. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's visceral anger coming towards the Haredim from within the religious Zionist community on the right as well. But looking at religious Zionists who have made friends with the Haredi desire not to go to the army and are actually helping that happen. So there's a lot of anger around here. There's a lot of feeling threatened. And I just always try to find the peacemakers. I just always try to find the people who are able to try to recreate a center, because I just do not believe that the answers are on the extremes. I just don't believe it. And so to try to figure out how to have a conversation about the future when some people in the religious Zionist community are saying we need to take over Gaza, and some people in the religious Zionism are saying, I'm going to take off my kippah if you do that, because that's an embarrassment to what I stand for. I mean, how do you work through that? How do you work through that? And I'm just learning it firsthand in a new kind of way, really seeing that, and then trying to find the people who are attempting to build broader coalitions in Israeli society, right? In Israeli society, who's trying to build broader coalitions between secular, religious, between Jewish and Arab? Who's trying to build those? Because those people may be suspect to everybody else, but to me, they're the linchpin that holds it all together.
Beautiful, beautiful, very interesting. It's like Mr. Rogers, find the helpers. I want to. This is my last question. Yeah, so I had Rabbi Moshe Weinberger on a couple weeks ago, and he spoke about the Chazon Ish, like his day.
No,
like
this is bad. You're not allowed to say this because I haven't listened to the interview yet, and I wanted to before you said this, but fine, I'll take you at your word.
I'll give you one part of it. I'll give you a taste. So he mentioned the Chazon Ish having these very, very difficult days where he's helping people in the community. And then the doors finally close the end of the night, and him sitting and learning Torah, and like his assistant kind of being like, I see all this joy in your face and like how you're learning Torah right now and what it looks like, and you're like into it as though nothing's going on. And him saying like, beneath all the pain and suffering of the day, like there's something below that, and that's where I tap into God, and that's where I connect, and that's pure joy for me, and that's there. You know, we've evolved here, you're saying. This is not a time of October 8th, how do you learn Torah, which I know we've had conversations there. Now we're in a like, after we're in the Iran war and America has entered stuff. I just want to ask you as a human who I know is passionate about learning Torah, like what does your Torah learning look like that, and what are you bringing to that? Are you looking for Torah to address the moment? Is this like an escape for you? Is this like it feels even more powerful because you're connecting to the source? What does Torah study look like for you in the last 10 days?
I'll tell you, the first day of the war with Iran, Daf Yomi, the daily Talmud page, started Tractate Avodah Zarah. Tractate Avodah Zarah is all about the relationship between Jews and other peoples in the world. Has plenty to say about Persia, has plenty to say about Rome. And it couldn't be, in some ways, it couldn't be more fitting for the Jewish people right now, given how much the question of Jews and everyone else is on the table, whether it's the Jewish state, whether it's Jews living in the diaspora, couldn't be more on the table, right? But when I learn it and when I sit, I'm not trying to make any sort of linear comparison. If anything, what I'm recognizing is that throughout our covenantal march through history with God, the Jewish people have experienced these questions in different ways. The same questions over and over and over again. What does Jewish particularism look like? And will everybody hate us for it? What does Jewish universalism look like? And when does it go too far? How do we connect to others but remember who we are? These are endemic to the human and the Jewish experience. And so when I learn Torah, what I do is I really connect up to something that we've been working through. And it's part of our covenantal relationship with God. That triangulation between God, humanity, and the Jewish people, that's all of a piece. And so I'm inspired to know that I come from a tradition of hundreds of thousands of years of trying to do our best to live a godly life amidst really big questions about how that's done. And to be able to connect up to that being something that is it's not a right of ours, it's a privilege of ours to march through history in this covenantal way. That it gives me a sense of foundation and grounding inside, even in shaky times.
Beautiful. We are out of time, but that really, I needed that. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Elana Stein Hain, again, I'll say you guys should be safe. You should see Yona in the right time, your son in the right time. My gosh. I'll be thinking of people running up to their running up the stairs to grab an older lady and bringing them down to the shelter. It's an amazing image that you shared with me and how powerful that is, and then walking them back up. And I hope you are right that this is a moment in history that we will look back on as a time of real joy and good for the Jewish people and also for humanity. And we'll keep talking, I guess.
I hope so. And if anybody out there sees my 10-year-old son, tell him I love him.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד.